October 1600, the Battle of Sekigahara. The Shimizu clan is being overrun, and their soldiers are screaming to retreat. Amidst the blood and fire, Tohisa stands ready, refusing to back down even as the situation turns dire. He prepares to make a final stand as a rearguard, facing an entire army to buy time for his clan to escape. His uncle shouts at him to retreat, pleading with him to return to Satsuma so they can survive together. Toyohisa looks back with a faint smile, admitting he'd love to go home, but he's already made his choice. He tells his uncle to keep moving. As long as the head of the clan survives, the Shimizu have won. On the opposing side, the Tokugawa gunners prepare their matchlocks, aiming for the lone samurai. Toyohisa actually looks excited. He's about to face the two branches Red Devils, the strongest enemies he could ask for. The enemy cavalry charges across the field, led by their commander, Naomasa. Naomasa stares down the opposition, determined not to let a single man from Satsuma escape alive. Toyohisa knows he just needs to hold them for a few more minutes. Every second he buys his life for his uncle. The sound of thundering hooves drowns out the battlefield as the two forces are about to collide. His uncle finally pulls away, yelling that he'll be waiting back in Satsuma for Toyohisa's return. The samurai smiles to himself. He knows he's got a good uncle, but now it's time to fulfill his duty. The command is given, and a volley of gunfire erupts from the enemy lines. Chaos erupts as bullets tear through the air and the first wave of soldiers falls. Thick smoke blankets the ground as the sounds of clashing blades and screams fill the air. Toyohisa charges straight into the heart of the enemy, appearing like a ghost through the haze. He swings his blade with brutal efficiency, cutting through horsemen and soldiers alike. He's a whirlwind of blood and steel, moving forward without a hint of fear. Naomasa actually pauses to salute the man's incredible spirit before they finally cross blades. The samurai is quickly surrounded by the thundering cavalry, but he doesn't slow down. Naomasa tells him he's already a dead man, but Toyohisa just looks up with a defiant grin. He tells the commander to shut up. He's not here to talk. He's here for a head. He lunges at Naomasa, but the enemy's guards move in fast to block his path. The soldiers shout to protect their lord, swarming the lone warrior. A forest of spears suddenly closes in, trapping him from every side. The blades sink deep into his body, but Toyohisa doesn't stop his forward momentum. He actually licks the blood off his katana while, pinned down, he's completely unhinged. Despite being skewered, he keeps pushing toward the commander, refusing to die until his job is done. Naomasa is visibly shocked that anyone could still be standing after taking that much damage. More spears pierce through him, pinning him to the spot as blood spills across the grass. He looks Naomasa right in the eyes, his own gaze burning with an insane intensity. In one last desperate move, he pulls out a matchlock gun while still being stabbed. He levels the barrel at the commander's chest, a final, lethal surprise. The gun roars, and the point-blank shot blasts Naomasa right off his horse. The enemy leader hits the ground hard, coughing up blood from a massive chest wound. Toyohisa finally collapses as well, his strength spent after taking down his target. The Tokugawa soldiers panic, screaming for a retreat so they can try to save their dying lord. The entire cavalry unit turns and flees, abandoning the battlefield in a desperate rush. Toyohisa drags himself up one more time, yelling at the retreating army to come back and finish it. He demands they leave their heads behind as they disappear into the distance. Toyohisa screams Naomasa's name into the empty air, still demanding the commander's head, even as his strength fails. He staggers through the grass, his footprints leaving a trail of blood behind him. Every breath is a struggle as the samurai's body finally begins to give out from his massive wounds. He pushes through the tall reeds, looking for any sign of the enemy he was just fighting. The world starts to spin, and he finally collapses face first into the dirt. He looks up one last time, his vision fading as the sounds of the battlefield disappear. His eyes snap open, but the muddy field is gone, replaced by a sterile, white floor under his sandals. Toyohisa finds himself in a seemingly infinite white corridor lined with doors, with a lone man sitting at a desk in the center. The man, known as Murasaki, sits calmly behind his desk, looking like a bored bureaucrat in the middle of nowhere. Toyohisa stares in total shock, noticing a lunchtime sign and some strange, modern documents on the desk. Murasaki looks up at him with a detached expression, as if this happens every day. On the desk lies a stack of files, including one with Toyohisa's name and another for a soldier from a completely different era. The mysterious man takes a drag from his cigarette, completely unimpressed by the bleeding samurai in front of him. Toyohisa tries to process where he is, but nothing about this sterile hallway makes any sense. Without a word of explanation, Murasaki simply signals for the next person in line. Before he can react, Toyohisa is suddenly transported in front of one of the many doors lining the hall. The door swings open, and a powerful force begins to pull him inside against his will. He reaches out, screaming that he won't go and that he has to return home to Satsuma. The void swallows him whole, dragging him out of the white corridor and into another world. He tumbles through the darkness, the sounds of his own shouting echoing around him. Back in the hallway, Murasaki just watches him go with a cold, professional stare. The cycle continues as the desk-bound man prepares to process the next soul. A soldier from a much more modern era appears in the hallway, looking just as confused as Toyohisa was. Back with the samurai, he's now lying in a peaceful, sun-drenched field that looks nothing like Sekigahara. He's out cold on the ground, his body finally at rest after the brutal battle. Two small figures approach his prone form, standing over him in silence. They're two elven children, staring down at the strange, armored man with curiosity. One of the boys notices the sheer amount of blood on the samurai and wonders if he's even still alive. They poke at him tentatively, asking in their own tongue if he can hear them. Toyohisa groans, his eyes fluttering open as he wonders if this peaceful place is actually hell. The kids are surprised to hear him speak, realizing he's one of the legendary drifters they've heard stories about. He tries to sit up, but ends up coughing up a fresh spray of blood, making the children jump back. Realizing he's dying, the boys decide they have no choice but to drag him to a place they call the castle in ruins. They pull him through a thick, ancient forest where the sunlight barely reaches the floor. Emerging from the trees, they find the crumbling remains of a massive stone fortress. The elven boys struggle to drag the heavy samurai up the path, complaining about how much he weighs. They're huffing and puffing, but they know they have to hurry before anyone else finds them. As they reach the entrance, a voice suddenly orders them to stop where they are. Nasu no Yoichi emerges from the shadows, bow drawn and ready to fire at the intruders. The archer demands to know what they're doing and who they've brought with them. The boys quickly explain that they found another drifter and that he's in desperate need of help. Yoichi lowers his guard slightly, his sharp eyes examining the wounded samurai from head to toe. The elven children whisper to each other, terrified that staying near the drifters will get them killed. They hurry away into the woods, leaving the mysterious, wounded samurai behind in the ruins. High above in the shadows of the stone walls, Nasu no Yoichi watches them leave, his keen eyes fixed on the unconscious Toyohisa. Deep within the dark halls of the ruins, the sound of heavy footsteps echoes against the cold stone. A voice explains to someone in the shadows that the local villagers have brought them a dying warrior. A man with a cynical gaze and a thin goatee, Oda Nobunaga, steps forward to inspect their new guest. Nobunaga orders them to do what they can for the samurai, though he's skeptical the man will survive such massive blood loss. He lets out a low, dry chuckle, noting how much the newcomer reminds him of themselves. The legendary warlord retreats into the darkness, musing on the bizarre nature of the world they've been dropped into. In the depths of his fever dream, Toyohisa sees a world consumed by smoke and the orange glow of a distant fire. He remembers a time when things were simpler, seeing a face from his past calling out his name with a smile. In his vision, he stands before a great warrior of the Shimazu clan, being praised for his bravery in his very first battle. The man, likely his father, beams with pride as he looks down at the young, promising samurai. Toyohisa's eyes snap open as he bolts upright, a single word, "Dad," escaping his lips in a desperate cry. He realizes he's in a strange room, his body wrapped in bandages that have been stitched with surprising skill. Instinct takes over as he feels the weight of his sword nearby, his hand immediately flying to the hilt. Weak but determined, he draws his blade and points it at the shadows, demanding to know where he is. Nobunaga steps into the light, meeting the samurai's aggression with a cold, mocking smirk. The tension in the room is palpable as the two legendary figures face off, Nobunaga holding a matchlock rifle with practiced ease. Toyohisa freezes, his eyes widening as he realizes there's something hauntingly familiar about the man with the eye patch. He spots the distinctive Mako family crest on the man's clothing, the unmistakable symbol of the House of Oda. Disbelief colors his voice as he asks if the man is really an Oda, but Nobunaga just calls him an O for stating the obvious. With a dramatic flourish, the man confirms his identity. He is the great unifier, Oda Nobunaga himself. Toyohisa can only stare, his mind reeling as he tries to reconcile the legendary figure with the man standing before him. Suddenly, the samurai lashes out with a lightning-fast strike, but Nobunaga is just as quick to evade the blade. Toyohisa roars that it's impossible, because Lord Nobunaga has been dead for nearly 2 decades. He's convinced that he's in the netherworld and that a demon is using the great warlord's face to trick him. Before the fight can continue, a sharp sound cuts through the air, and the two men find themselves pinned by a third presence. Nasu no Yoichi steps through the archway, his bow already notched and aimed perfectly at the feuding pair. The three men settle around a small campfire, the initial violence replaced by a wary, uneasy peace. Yoichi gives a faint, feminine smile, telling the samurai that it's a relief to see he's actually survived his wounds. The archer casually goes back to plucking the feathers from a bird, as if the life-or-death standoff never happened. Nobunaga sits back and watches with amusement as Toyohisa tries to process the impossible group he's landed in. Shadows dance on the walls as the three drifters sit in silence, each from a different point in Japanese history. The smell of roasting meat begins to fill the air, a small comfort in the midst of their bizarre situation. Nobunaga idly chews on a feather, finding it hilarious that everyone back home apparently thinks he's long dead. Toyohisa insists it's the truth, recounting how Nobunaga was betrayed by Akechi Mitsuhide at Hanaji 18 years ago. The news hits Nobunaga like a physical blow, his expression shifting from amusement to absolute shock. He explodes in anger, shouting that the attack on Hanaji only happened 6 months ago from his perspective. Toyohisa can't find any other explanation than that he's being haunted by a ghost or deceived by a shape-shifting devil. The absurdity of the time gap is too much for Yoichi, who begins to howl with laughter at the two confused warlords. The master archer smiles, finding it incredibly funny that they are getting so worked up over a measly 15-year difference. Toyohisa stares at the archer in confusion, his mind struggling to process another impossible claim. The archer introduces himself with a calm, confident smile as Nasu no Sukataka Yoichi. Toyohisa's eyes widen in shock, his frustration mounting as he accuses the man of lying to his face. He shouts that it's impossible, as Nasu no Yoichi was a hero of the Genpei War, which took place over 400 years ago. Yoichi remains unfazed by the outburst, simply acknowledging that while the story seems absurd, it is the truth of his identity. Toyohisa grips his head, desperately trying to wake up from what he is certain must be a very long and twisted nightmare. The young samurai finally finds his voice and introduces himself as Shimizu Toyohisa, the son of Shimizu Yahisa. Nobunaga's expression shifts to one of deep calculation as he repeats the name Shun, realizing exactly who they have among them. Oda Nobunaga looks over a map of this strange new world, noting how provincial characters from the edge of Japan never caught his attention. Nasu no Yoichi mentions he's heard of the Shimizu clan too. Apparently, they were already around back in his era. Shimizu Toyohisa isn't taking the provincial comment well, screaming about how he'll kill anyone who humiliates his clan. Yoichi tells the hot-headed samurai to settle down, reminding him he was just stitched up after nearly dying. A small fire crackles between them as Toyohisa tries to process who he's talking to. Toyohisa can't believe he's looking at Oda Nobunaga, since the man was supposed to have died in a fire at Honnuji Temple years ago. Nobunaga explains that while he was trying to flee the temple with his attendant, he suddenly found himself in a place. He describes a surreal, endless corridor paved with stone and lined with doors. Yoichi chimes in, confirming that the exact same thing happened to him when he met that strange man. Toyohisa's eyes go wide. He saw that guy too, right in the middle of his retreat from the Battle of Sekigahara. Nobunaga has never heard of Sekigahara, so Toyohisa explains it was a massive clash between the Tokugawa and Ishida forces. Nobunaga starts to sweat, realizing he's been out of the loop for a lot longer than he thought. Toyohisa explains that after the death of the Kanpaku, the world descended back into the chaos of the Sengoku era. Nobunaga's jaw drops when he hears that the one who took over the world was Hideyoshi, the man he used to call his bald mouse. Toyohisa clarifies that Hideyoshi killed the traitor Akechi, wiped out the rival clans, and unified Japan. Nobunaga loses it, screaming as he learns that his grand Tenka Fubu dream is ancient history and his clan is now just a lowly servant to the Tokugawa. He calms down enough to ask about his son, Nobutada. Toyohisa delivers the grim news. His son died fighting to the bitter end when his castle was besieged. Instead of mourning, Nobunaga throws his head back and laughs at his foolish son. He mutters that the idiot should have just run away. He looks at his own hand, realizing that 50 years of ambition seemingly went up in smoke. Yoichi just smiles peacefully, remarking that nothing lasts forever and noting he was just as shocked to hear the Genji clan was gone. Toyohisa stares at the archer, trying to wrap his head around something else entirely. He admits he thought Yoichi was a woman at first, or maybe even Mori Ranmaru, which gets him some very annoyed looks. Deep in the brush nearby, a pair of mechanical lenses zooms in on the ruins where the warriors are resting. A scout watches from the shadows, struggling to hear their conversation from such a distance. They report back through a communication device, confirming that 3 drifters have gathered in one single spot. Elsewhere, a man named Ham receives the report, confirming he's tracked down 2 of them already. He looks out over a desolate plain where 2 elderly figures are visible in the distance. The 2 old men are in the middle of a heated scuffle, shouting about someone being a plagiarist. One of them claims he's a winner, and the winner takes all. The other roars back, accusing him of imitating his legendary campaigns at Zama and Kani. Seeing the chaos, the observer decides it's time to intervene and heads toward the bickering duo. Back at a base filled with stacks of books, a young man in a white uniform sighs that they have to do something. He looks up at the moon, predicting that if they don't act, this world is going to face its end. Meanwhile, a quiet village sits under the moonlight, completely unaware of the threat heading its way. Inside one of the homes, 2 young elves get a stern talking to for going back to the ruined castle. An older elf warns them that the human lord's men will kill them if they find out they've been helping the drifters. He glares at them, demanding they understand the danger they've put the village in. The night stays silent over the elven settlement, but shadows are moving in the fields. Armed soldiers emerge from the darkness, their eyes glowing faintly under their helmets. Their leader scoffs that it's a shame to strike before the harvest, but gives the order to move in any way. Toyohisa is breathing hard, clearly in pain from his previous wounds as he tries to center himself. He forces himself up, clutching his stomach while his body protests the sudden movement. Yoichi looks back at him, noticing that the samurai has already picked up on the shift in the air. Nobunaga is the first to name it, that metallic, unmistakable scent of a battlefield. Toyohisa's face hardens as he realizes he isn't the only one doing the killing tonight. Looking past the trees, several thick plumes of smoke are rising into the night sky under the moon. Nobunaga realizes the fire is coming from the elven village beyond the woods. It's the smell of a raid, most likely brigands looking for an easy target while everyone is sleeping. He reminds Toyohisa that those guys with the long ears are the ones who drag him to safety when he was half dead. Without a second thought, Toyohisa draws his blade, the steel catching the moonlight with a sharp ring. Nobunaga asks if he's seriously planning on heading straight into the fire in his current condition. Toyohisa doesn't care if this is a dream or reality. All he knows is that he's built to move forward and kill. He takes off into the darkness, leaving the others behind as he sprints toward the smoke. Nobunaga sighs at the oaf's impulsiveness, noting he's as reckless as a stray bullet. But he and Yoichi aren't about to let him have all the fun, as they check their gear and prepare to follow. Toyohisa tears through the brush, ignoring the branches whipping against his armor. He taunts Nobunaga for being slow, but the legendary lord just yells back that he's already in his 50s. The age gap is massive. Toyohisa is only 30, while Yoichi reveals he's just 19 years old. Yoichi giggles as Toyohisa looks at him in utter disbelief. Toyohisa can't believe this kid is the same legendary hero he read about in the Genpei War records. They continue their dash, the forest blurring past as they close in on the village. At the village, the elven boys are frozen in terror as they watch their home burn. They watch, paralyzed, as a group of armed knights closes in on them from the shadows. One of the soldiers looms over them on horseback, his heavy armor glinting in the firelight. Suddenly, Toyohisa's eyes pierce through the darkness from the edge of the clearing. Nobunaga levels his matchlock from the shadows, ready to provide cover from a distance. One of the knights barely has time to react before the world starts to explode around him. A spray of blood hits the ground as Toyohisa makes his violent entrance. He drops right into the middle of the soldiers, a terrifying figure of steel and raw aggression. With one massive swing, he carves through the front line of the raiding party. His blade is a blur, leaving a trail of carnage in its wake as it cuts through armor and flesh. He grabs one of the knights, demanding the man leave his head right there on the grass. The soldier can't understand a word of the samurai's language, which only seems to annoy Toyohisa. Toyohisa's face contorts into a demonic grin as he corners his next victim. He delivers a brutal strike that sends the soldier's helmet and head flying into the night. The young elves cry out in terror as blood spatters across the scorched earth. Toyohisa looks at the terrified children, casually commenting on how strange their ears look. He tells them that since they saved him, it's only fair that he returns the favor and saves them. Nobunaga walks up behind him, asking if he's actually planning on letting the rest of these guys live. He notes that none of these soldiers can speak Japanese either, which makes things a bit complicated. Toyohisa grabs the boys and tells them to repeat after him. They need to shout for help, so he has a justification to keep killing. As the terrified elves scream, Toyohisa turns back to the rest of the soldiers with a murderous look in his eyes. As smoke rises from the distant village, Toyohisa's declaration to take the town echoes with a cold, strategic weight. In his infinite corridor, Murasaki watches through the glass, noting that these men don't think in terms of rescue or help, only conquest. He muses on the nature of these drifters, warriors who possess a singular, morbid talent for war that has defined them since birth. Nobunaga recognizes that same spark in Toyohisa. No matter where or when they are, their reasoning always returns to battle. He understands that their path is not one of mere survival, but of eventually seizing control of this entire world. Sizing up the approaching force, Nobunaga notes that these are professional soldiers under the local lord's command, far too well-equipped to be common brigands. A wicked grin spreads across his face as he laughs at their foolishness. To him, they're just inviting him to take everything they own. At the heart of the village, a blond, armored man barks orders at his men to line up the remaining elves. Lord Aram's soldiers have the defenseless villagers surrounded, their spears leveled at the terrified families. The elven villagers are being beaten and rounded up without mercy, their simple homes already beginning to catch fire. Forced to their knees in the dirt, the elves watch in horror as their peaceful life is systematically dismantled. The village elder begs for an explanation from the cold-eyed noble, Lord Aram, questioning what sin they have committed. Lord Aram, an arrogant antagonist, looks down on the old man and accuses them of the ultimate offense, assisting the drifters. The elder tries to explain that the children only acted to save a dying man, but Aram remains completely unmoved. Aram clarifies that dealing with drifters is strictly the job of the Octoberist organization. Any demi-human involvement is a capital crime. He barks a command for silence as the elder continues to plead for mercy for his people. The elder's voice cracks with desperation as he describes the impossible, starving conditions the Lord's laws have imposed on them. He accuses the humans of taking their women and their livelihoods, asking if the true goal is simply to let the elves die. Lord Aram's response is chillingly blunt as he agrees that their swift death is exactly what is required. He tells them to curse their ancestors for losing the war, claiming that all demi-human races are destined for extinction. Aram stands tall amidst the suffering, looking down on the elder with a gaze that holds zero empathy. One of the elven boys cries out in horror at the heartless decree, his small frame trembling with fear. Aram smiles, casually mentioning his orders to reduce the elven population by half to maintain order. The soldiers begin their grim work, striking down the villagers as they beg for the nightmare to stop. Aram tells the elder to take care of himself, mockingly promising him a future as a broken farm slave. He mocks the two missing boys, assuming they've already been killed and eaten by insects in the forest. But from the edge of the clearing, Toyo Hisa's intense, murderous gaze fixates on the arrogant noble. The massacre is suddenly interrupted by a frantic soldier reporting that the wheat fields have been set ablaze. Lord Aram is furious, realizing the loss of the harvest means a massive drop in his collected taxes. Emerging from the smoke, Nobunaga laughs like a demon, looking completely at home in the middle of the inferno. To him, the sight of a burning landscape is nostalgic, reminding him of his infamous siege at Ayase Nagashima. The soldiers are thrown into a panic, their focus shifting from the execution to the fire spreading through the crops. In the confusion, Nobunaga's dark silhouette moves through the fire with lethal, calculated intent. Lord Aram's eyes narrow in confusion and growing fear as the situation spirals out of his control. Suddenly, Toyo Hisa launches himself from the smoke like a projectile, his blade already drawn. The knights have no time to raise their shields before the samurai is upon them in a flurry of movement. A single, powerful stroke of his blade splits through armor and flesh with terrifying ease. Toyo Hisa grins wildly as he marks his first kill, his eyes glowing with the raw thrill of the hunt. He doesn't slow down for a moment, immediately pivoting his weight to strike at the next group of soldiers. The knights are frozen in shock, unable to comprehend the sheer speed of this new, demonic attacker. Blood sprays through the air as another soldier is cut down before he can even manage to draw his sword. In the flickering light of the burning fields, Toyo Hisa is a whirlwind of destruction, cutting a bloody path through the enemy. As the battle rages, Lord Aram screams at his men to maintain order and kill the intruder, but the panic among his ranks is already absolute. Toyo Hisa points his blade directly at Aram, demanding his head and questioning if he is the general of this pathetic army. He stares down the blonde noble with a cold, predatory intensity, ignoring the carnage he's already left in his wake. The samurai's expression shifts to one of utter disdain as he decides that Aram's head isn't even worth taking. Lord Aram sneers back, though he is visibly rattled, unable to understand a single word of the strange language the drifter is speaking. Nobunaga continues his cynical monologue, explaining how stripping a people of both their food and their pride leaves them with nothing to lose and everything to gain through violence. With a dark, toothy grin, Nobunaga reflects that this ruthless strategy was the same one used against him during the Honganji Rebellion, and it remains the best way to conquer a nation. Lord Aram smirks, finally putting a name to the man standing before him, a drifter. Shimazu Tohisa's gaze is ice-cold, and the pool of blood at his feet shows he isn't here to negotiate. The elven villagers can only watch in shock, paralyzed by the sudden, brutal violence. Aram tries to act tough, but Toyo Hisa just responds with a dark, knowing grin. The samurai doesn't care about titles. He's just here to end the governor's life. One of the elven boys whispers the name, realizing this drifter is unlike any human they've ever seen. In the chaos, the surviving villagers find each other, weeping with relief. The boy stares at the terrifying man who just saved them from certain death. Aram draws his blade, refusing to be humiliated by a barbarian who can't even speak his language. Despite the governor's reputation as a legendary knight, the boy knows he's in over his head. Toyo Hisa lunges forward, closing the gap before the knight can even react. He's a blur of motion, his sheath and blade working in a deadly, rhythmic dance. Aram tries to taunt him, asking if he's afraid, but his own posture is starting to fail. Desperate, the governor swings with everything he has, trying to catch the samurai. Toyo Hisa effortlessly vaults over the strike, making the knight look like an amateur. Their eyes meet for a split second as the samurai sails through the air. Before the governor can turn his head, Toyo Hisa is already behind him, delivering a crushing blow. The samurai keeps the pressure on while Aram's smug face finally starts to crack. A heavy kick connects right with the knight's face, sending him tumbling back. The impact is sickeningly efficient, snapping Aram's head back as he groans in pain. Toyo Hisa yells his disdain, making it clear that this noble is absolutely nothing to him. He grabs the governor and slams him face first into the dirt. Dust and debris fly as the man's pride hits the floor along with his body. Instead of using his blade, Toyohisa uses his heavy wooden sheath to hammer Aram into the ground. Oda Nobunaga watches from the shadows, explaining that this brutal sheath work is a classic Japanese technique. Nasu no Yoichi joins him, both veteran warriors casually observing the one-sided beatdown. Nearby, the rest of the soldiers lie scattered and broken. The battle was over before it even started. Nobunaga can't help but smirk at the sheer efficiency of the kids' violence. Up in the night sky, a strange trail of smoke drifts past the moon. Toyohisa takes a breath, looking up at the unfamiliar stars as the adrenaline begins to fade. The elves gather around the mangled mess that used to be their oppressor. Aram is barely recognizable, begging for it to stop through the blood and broken teeth. Toyohisa stands over his victim before turning his attention to the elven boy. He draws a dagger and holds it out, handle first. He tells the boy to do it, to be the one to finish the job himself. To the samurai, it doesn't matter where you are. If someone takes from you, you must take your revenge. Nobunaga realizes the boy can't understand the words, but the message is unmistakable. The elven boy's hands shake as he grips the weapon, staring down at the man who murdered his family. With a final, agonizing scream, he plunges the blade home, ignoring the governor's pathetic pleas. Toyohisa stands amidst the smoke, a silhouette of pure, unwavering iron will. The villagers watch in a mix of awe and terror, realizing their world has just changed forever. Seeing the boy finally claim his revenge, Toyohisa lets out a small, satisfied smile. Nobunaga and Yoichi find Toyohisa, joking about his wounds as they regroup. The veteran warlord offers the kid a seat, but Toyohisa seems more focused on his recovery. High above, someone is watching the trio through a scope, reporting back to their master. The elven villagers keep a safe distance, watching the three legendary warriors rest against the wall. Elsewhere, in a surreal, endless hallway, a newspaper sits on a desk between rows of doors. Murasaki sits in his office, casually smoking while he reads up on the latest events. He peers over his glasses, sense of something approaching the doors. A pair of modern boots clicks against the floor as a visitor arrives in the white void. Easy steps into view, mocking Murasaki for his useless efforts to save the world with drifters. Her eyes are cold as she tells him that everything he's doing is ultimately futile. Murasaki doesn't even look up from his paper, telling her to just go away. He finally stares her down, making it clear he won't let her play her game unchecked. Easy isn't intimidated, her gaze burning with a quiet intensity. She carries the mark of the offscourings, the opposing force to Murasaki's champions. A newspaper headline reveals her move. The Black King has begun his march from the south. She smirks, confident that the drifters are no match for the monsters she's sending. A magical orb displays the elven village, confirming that Toyohisa's group has successfully taken it over. Murasaki dismisses her entirely, telling her that her time is up and she needs to leave. Far away, at the edge of the world, a young mage prepares for the coming storm. The north wall of Carneades stands as the final line of defense against the northern monsters. The mages can feel the shift in the air. They know the enemy is already close. A map shows the frontier fortress, the last obstacle for the Black King's army. The soldiers are confident, boasting that the wall has stood for centuries without being breached. But the young mage knows better. He predicts the entire defense will crumble within 2 days. Inside the command center, arguments break out over how to survive the impossible odds. The generals are outraged at the suggestion of putting their lives in the hands of 2 filthy drifters. The young mage snaps back, calling out their ignorance of the true power they're facing. The soldiers look at the 2 old men sitting in the corner with nothing but contempt. They can't believe these wretches are supposed to be their salvation. One of the elders looks back, unfazed by the insults being hurled at him. Hannibal Barca, once the terror of Rome, now looks like a senile old man who just needs to use the bathroom. A soldier yells at him, calling him an idiot for even being there. The old general doesn't care, proceeding to pee right in the middle of the fortress. The mages burst out laughing, seeing nothing but a pathetic old man. Their mocking laughter echoes through the hall as they dismiss the drifters as a joke. Scipio Africanus watches them, his eyes sharp despite his aged appearance. He suddenly grabs a soldier, his intensity catching everyone off guard. He roars at them, revealing the identity of the old man they were just mocking, Hannibal Barca. Scipio makes it clear they could gather millions of men, and they still wouldn't compare to the tactical genius of this one wretch. In the shadows, the young mage realizes the drifters need to get out while they still can. Scipio just scoffs at him, talking about the fundamental difference between winners and losers. The two get into a shouting match, old pride clashing with the desperation of the present. The young mage stares in horror as the magical orb in his hand goes dark, realizing their communications are being intentionally blocked. Every surveillance crystal across the perimeter fails simultaneously, cutting the commanders off from the front lines. Confusion spreads through the ranks as the sudden loss of information creates a chaotic fuss among the soldiers. Seemingly oblivious to the crisis, Scipio and Hannibal focus on their own battle, a heated argument over a hidden pack of cigarettes. A man in a cowboy hat sighs, telling his partner that their gang doesn't really have a future. The mood shifts instantly as a soldier spots a terrifying presence arriving on the battlefield. The Black King finally makes his debut, standing tall before a massive army of monsters. The hooded leader looms under the crescent moon, looking like a total nightmare. Ancient flags from different wars ripple in the wind as the march begins. Huge winged beasts take flight, letting out a screech that signals the start of the Imperial March. The dark silhouettes of the dragons sweep across the ground like a bad omen. Rows of armored soldiers move forward in perfect, eerie silence. The orcs and goblins let out a collective howl, eager to get the killing started. The message is spreading fast. The end of the world is officially in motion. A bird-like monster screeches, sounding like it's ready to tear everything apart. Dragon riders soar through the clouds, closing in on the human defenses at the wall. One of the defenders can barely believe his eyes as he realizes the Black King is actually here. A massive title card confirms what everyone's afraid of. The march has begun. Up on the wall, the soldiers curse at the sight of the endless swarm heading their way. One of the magicians stares at the hooded figure, wondering how much hate is driving him. The Black King's palms are covered in deep scars, a sign of the pain fueling his crusade. He reaches out towards the moon, looking like he's ready to claim the entire world. With a simple command, the Black King orders his forces to bring nothing but death. A massive rain of arrows pours down from the wall, but it barely slows the monsters down. The human archers keep firing, desperately try to hold back the tide. A mysterious figure in a white cloak starts to move toward the front lines. The name Hijikata is whispered, signaling the arrival of a legend from another era. Hijikata Tashizo, a grim commander in a long duster coat, steps forward with his swords ready. He looks completely stone-faced as he stares down the human defenses. Next up is Jeanne d'Arc, a vengeful warrior with short hair and a maniacal look in her eyes. She flashes a twisted smirk, clearly enjoying the chaos of the battlefield. The announcements continue as more heavy hitters join the Black King's side. Anastasia Romanova, a woman with long hair and a cold, empty gaze, steps into view. With a single word from their leader, the generals are given the green light to attack. Glowing light starts to pour from the Black King's palms as he unleashes his power. A hooded man asks him if he really plans on ending the entire world. The Black King doesn't care. He tells his generals they're free to do whatever they want. A man with long dark hair just smirks, seemingly amused by the apocalypse. This is Kuruhangan Yashitsun, another legendary warrior brought back to life. He sits back casually, wondering which side he actually belongs on in this fight. Back on the wall, the commander screams for more arrows as the situation gets desperate. Dragon knights dive out of the sky to provide aerial support for the ground troops. The soldiers panic as more monsters start scaling the wall, one after another. A massive dragon lunges over the edge, snapping its jaws at the terrified men. It opens its maw wide, ready to swallow anyone in its path. Flames erupt across the top of the wall, turning the defense into a total nightmare. Dragons swoop down from the smoke, bathing the wall in flames as the human soldiers scramble for cover. Above the roar of fire, a new sound cuts through, a human voice screaming commands into a radio headset. A massive dragon peers over the edge of the ramparts, watching its prey try to flee down the stone face. A desperate volley of arrows hits the ground, but they do nothing against the swarm of hairy monsters below. One of the creatures grunts as it checks a tactical layout, proving these beasts aren't just attacking blindly. The human magicians on the wall realize they're done for, as the order is given to abandon the defense. A colossal stone portal starts to creak, opening a doorway that shouldn't even exist in this world. With a deafening roar, a Japanese World War II fighter plane screams through the gate and into the fantasy sky. Everyone below, monster and man alike, looks up in total shock at the roaring metal bird circling above. Inside the cockpit, the pilot, Naoshi Kano, is just as stunned, staring out at the dragons like he's lost his mind. Naoshi Kano, a hot-headed Japanese pilot, is the newest drifter to crash land into this crazy war. Frustrated by the chaos, Kano slams his fists against the controls, screaming at his plane to keep it together. He pulls his machine into a sharp banking turn, buzzing the heads of the orc army with a thunderous roar. Kano looks out his side window at the medieval castle walls, wondering if he's accidentally flown onto a movie set. The magicians on the ground watch the metal machine circle the burning city, wondering if it's a god or a new kind of demon. Kano doesn't waste any time, calling the dragon's monsters as he banks his plane to line up a shot. One of the October's magicians pushes his companion to keep moving, knowing their mission is to save the other drifters. Down on the walls, the battle has turned into a total bloodbath as the monsters finally breach the main line. Amidst the smoke and carnage, the stoic figure of Hijikata Toshizo prepares to enter the fray. He stands with his katana drawn, his long coat whipping in the wind as he stares down the human defenses. He has the cold, focused eyes of a man who's already died once and has nothing left to lose. The human defense crumbles completely as the monstrous swarm pours over the shattered gate. Panic spreads through the ranks like wildfire as the soldiers realize the north gate has been lost. Suddenly, Jean Dark steps forward, manifesting a terrifying wall of fire that incinerates anyone nearby. This isn't the same from the history books. This version of Jean is a vengeful spirit who wants to see everything burn. She reaches out into the inferno with a crazed grin, seemingly nourished by the heat and the screams. With a simple gesture, she sends a massive blast of flame through the ranks of the fleeing defenders. She laughs as she declares her hatred for the world, wishing for every city and soul to turn to ash. A massive wave of fire sweeps across the battlefield, wiping out an entire regiment in a single blinding flash. The humans have no way to fight back against this kind of supernatural power as their wall is systematically leveled. On another part of the wall, Anastasia Romanova stands in the middle of a swirling, frozen blizzard. She looks on with a sad, empty expression, using her ice powers to bring a permanent sleep to her enemies. Behind her, the Black King's army of monsters charges into the breach, their victory now all but guaranteed. The city inside the wall is a vision of hell, with buildings collapsing and fire spreading through the narrow streets. A dragon hovers over the escaping civilians, breathing a stream of white-hot fire into the heart of the city. High above the burning city, Naoshi Kano's plane is still circling, a technological relic in a world of magic. Wide shots of Carneades show the entire horizon is glowing orange from the sheer scale of the fires. A survivor can only stare in mute horror as they realize there's nowhere left to run. In his cockpit, Kano screams one last insult at the monsters, refusing to accept that he's in a different world. Two mysterious men in the back of a cart watch the city fall, seemingly unfazed by the destruction. Scipio Africanus, a legendary Roman general who's seen better days, urges everyone to board the wagon immediately. He looks on with grim resignation as the north wall falls, while beside him, the great Hannibal Barca just babbles in confusion. The October's magician pleads with the drifters, Scipio Africanus and Hannibal Barca, acknowledging the strangeness of this world while begging for their help against the Black King. He looks at Scipio, asking if they even stand a chance, while the general just watches the burning city in the distance with a grim expression. Scipio Africanus cracks a small, weary smile, telling the magician that the chances aren't zero just yet. He believes that if they can unite their strength with the other drifters, there might still be a glimmer of hope for this world. The focus shifts back to the ruins, where Shimizu Toyohisa and his group remain their greatest chance at turning the tide of this war. The blonde gunslinger shouts for his partner to floor it. Their horse-drawn carriage speeds through the streets, carrying a heavy Gatling gun in the back. Right on their tail is a massive horde of armored monsters charging through the ruins. The gunslinger opens fire, the rapid-fire weapon shredding the front line of the beastly army. A storm of empty brass casings flies through the air as the mechanism whirs. Surrounded by thick smoke, he keeps his finger on the trigger, determined to thin the herd. Up front, his partner realizes they're burning through their ammo way too fast. The weapon continues its deadly work, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. In the back, the veteran generals Hannibal Barca and Scipio Africanus watch the carnage. Butch Cassidy laughs at the sheer power of the weapon, while Scipio looks on in disbelief. The chaos isn't just on the ground. A massive dragon descends from the clouds. It opens its mouth wide, preparing to breathe a torrent of fire onto the city below. From high above, a pair of focused eyes locks onto the beast. It's the pilot Naoshi Kano, giving a cocky salute from the cockpit of his Zero fighter. He dives his plane, his machine guns tearing into the dragon's leathery hide. Naoshi laughs as he sends the fire-breathing monster spiraling down, though he has no idea where he actually is. The fighter plane leaves a white streak across the sky as it pulls away from the explosion. An observer below watches in awe, realizing they've just witnessed another drifter in action. The victory is short-lived as the city's defenses crumble, and the survivors are ordered to flee. An officer watches the smoke rise, realizing the north wall has finally fallen. Through the haze of the battlefield, a mysterious figure in a white cloak approaches. The Black King towers over the wounded, his presence signaling the end of the human occupation. He reaches out with a scarred hand, showing what he calls mercy to his monster followers. The Black King commands his army to seek out and destroy every human they find. He makes one thing clear: every drifter must be hunted down and killed. Way to the south, the war feels distant in the quiet ruins of a castle. Hiding in a hollowed-out log, a blonde magician named Almond watches the area through her binoculars. She's tracking Oda Nobunaga and the others, terrified by how messy things are getting. Suddenly, Shimizu Toyohisa is right behind her, his intense stare catching her completely off guard. Almond panics, screaming for help as she realizes she's been caught by the head-taker monster. Toyohisa pins her down, demanding to know who she is while Nasu no Yoichi and Nobunaga watch. Nobunaga notices she's speaking the language of their homeland. Toyohisa tells her to spit out everything she knows if she wants to stay in one piece. Nobunaga decides to dial up the terror, boasting about his bloody reputation as the Devil Lord. Terrified, Almond explains she's from the Octoberist organization and was sent to watch them. Nobunaga tells her to explain things so even a simpleton like Toyohisa can understand. She explains that people like them, legendary warriors from another world, are called drifters. She says they were brought here to fight a losing war against the darkness that consumes everything. The samurai aren't interested in being told what to do, dismissing her grand mission immediately. Almond warns them about the offscourings, evil beings from other worlds who want to exterminate humanity. Nobunaga just laughs, finding the idea of them being heroes absolutely hilarious. He proudly declares he's a demon and pure evil, so he doesn't care about their morality. Almond is stunned by his madness, realizing these drifters might be more dangerous than the monsters they're supposed to fight. Almond continues her grim explanation, saying the offscourings are driven by a pure, inexplicable hate for the world. She warns that they have already gathered an army of monsters in the north and are now marching south, leaving nothing but carnage. Nobunaga listens with a skeptical smirk, asking just how many soldiers she expects them to face with their small group. Almond admits their organization only has magicians, but they hope the drifters can lead the armies of the world's various lords. Nobunaga laughs at her naivety, explaining that no ruler in their right mind would just hand over their military power to a group of strangers. He points out that lords will cling to their power until the very end, even as their strongholds fall to the enemy. Toyohisa remains silent, trying to gauge if this Oda Nobunaga is a genius or just a complete fool. Almond grows desperate, shouting that without the drifters' help, humanity stands no chance of surviving the onslaught. Nobunaga's expression turns sinister as he declares their new plan. If the lords won't give them a country, they'll just have to take one by force. He tells Toyohisa that they'll start by conquering this land, and he's already decided that Toyohisa will be the head of their new government. Toyohisa is caught off guard, yelling that he never agreed to lead anything, while Yoichi just watches the two of them bicker. High above, the moon shines through the trees as the magician's great master watches from afar, admitting that these drifters are completely insane. Almond's voiceover continues, warning that the offscourings have pushed the world to the brink of extinction several times in the past. A vision of a burning fortress appears, showing the total annihilation that follows in the Black King's wake. The Black King himself stands amidst the ruins, a silent, hooded figure surrounded by the spears of his fallen enemies. In the present, the Black King surveys the fallen north wall of Carneades, where his army of monsters has finally broken through. His lieutenant, Grigory Rasputin, reports their losses, noting that while the monster casualties were low, 4 of their aerial dragon knights were taken down. The Black King speaks with a soft, messianic tone, declaring that every monster is his brethren and he will save every one of them. In the courtyard of the captured wall, groups of wounded monsters, goblins, kobolds, and orcs, wait for their leader's touch. The Black King reaches out a hand toward the massive, heavily wounded pig orc who is gasping for breath. He places a finger on the creature's chest, and a strange, pulsating energy begins to flow from the stigmata in his palm. The orc's wounds miraculously knit themselves back together, and the surrounding monsters watch in absolute reverence. The Black King tells the monster he fought well, and then orders the next wounded soldier to be brought forward. He turns to Rasputin, telling him to spread the news of the wall's fall to every corner of the world. The hooded figure reflects on how he once tried to save humanity, only to be denied and cast out by them. Rasputin watches his master with a look of cold admiration, calling the Black King's power and resolve truly fearsome. The command is given to the rest of the monstrous horde. Hunt down the drifters who fled from the battle at all costs. The Black King specifically wants the magicians who summoned the drifters found, so he can cut off their support. He knows that the drifters are the only force left that could possibly hinder his goal of total human annihilation. Among his generals, Hijikata Toshizo and other legendary figures wait in the shadows, ready to carry out his genocidal orders. Jeanne d'Arc, one of the ends, laughs maniacally, eager to take her flames to a fancier side where she can burn even more. The Black King raises his hand, declaring himself the unstoppable tragedy that will cover the world in pain and death. As the sun sets on the ruined wall, the monsters prepare to march south, leaving nothing but dust and ash behind them. Meanwhile, at the elven village, a young elf named Shera tries to convince his people that there's no turning back now that they've killed their human commander. Some of the older elves are terrified, arguing that the Empire will burn their fields and starve them to death for their rebellion. Shera stands his ground, shouting that they're already starving and being killed, so their only choice is to fight for their freedom. Shera's younger brother looks on as the argument heats up, but the tension is broken when Toyohisa and the other drifters enter the room. Toyohisa tries to talk to them, but neither side understands a word the other is saying, leading to an awkward, silent standoff. Almond quickly steps in, pulling out a translation talisman that her great master designed to bridge the gap between worlds. She sticks the paper talisman onto Yoichi's chest, telling him to speak and see if the elves can finally understand his words. Yoichi tests it out, and the elves are shocked to hear their own tongue coming from the mouth of the weird zombie warrior. Nobunaga examines one of the talismans, noting that it looks remarkably like the papers used by the Onmaiji magicians of Kyoto. Nobunaga tells Toyohisa that he needs to be the one to address the villagers, promising to stay right by his side and tell him exactly what to say. He then turns his attention back to the frustrated magician, calling her Hooter glasses and asking for a quick briefing on the elves. Almond explains that the elves were defeated by humans decades ago and have lived as poor farmers ever since, though they were once a very proud race with long lifespans. Nobunaga lets out a dark, satisfied laugh, pleased to have finally gathered all the information he needs to begin his conquest. Nobunaga is literally feeding Toyohisa lines to say to the elves. Toyohisa repeats them word for word while Nobunaga calls him a total disgrace. Toyohisa gets into character, asking the elves if their ancestors would be ashamed of them. The elves stare in shock as the warrior towers over them, asking if they're okay being this pathetic. He looks them dead in the eye and asks if they even want their country back. He gives them a choice: crawl and die like bugs, or fight for their dreams and go out in a blaze of glory. The pressure is on. He stands there waiting for an answer while the elves tremble. That is the trick. The elves start screaming that they're not slaves, and they definitely want their land back. Toyohisa cracks a small grin and tells them it's time to start taking over the country. Nobunaga watches from the sidelines, thinking the kid has a good rhythm. He says Toyohisa reminds him of someone. Nobunaga starts cackling, enjoying the idea of being the eminence Grice while Toyohisa leads. Toyohisa turns back, looking completely serious. He clarifies that he's not Nobunaga's dead son. He's Shinzu Toyohisa. Nobunaga snaps, calling him an idiot and saying he looks nothing like his kid. He tries to brush it off as nonsense, but he's sweating a bit. As Nobunaga walks off, Toyohisa realizes he might have hit a nerve. Nobunaga stops and mentions that if his father were still around, he'd be roughly Toyohisa's age. Toyohisa is caught off guard by the sudden comment. Then Nobunaga ruins the moment by asking where Satsuma even is. Toyohisa starts fuming. Toyohisa doesn't take the insult well and goes for a punch. It turns into a full-blown scuffle between the two historical legends. While they're rolling around, Yoichi just watches, thinking about fighting with his own brothers. He has a quick flashback to the 10 brothers of the Nasu clan back in his day. Back in the present, the village erupts into chaos as everyone tries to break up the fight. Toyohisa finally pulls away, reminding them they don't have time to waste since an army is coming. Shira steps up to thank the samurai for looking after his younger brothers. Toyohisa asks if the rumors about an incoming army are true, and Shira confirms they are. Nobunaga breaks down the math. Since they wiped out a patrol, a larger force will be here in a few days. He estimates they have about 2 days before the village gets torched. Shira falls to his knees, begging the drifters for help. He explains that they've never fought because their parents' generation was wiped out 40 years ago. Toyohisa looks at Shira and asks how old he actually is. Shira says he's 36, and another kid behind him is 39. The drifters are stunned. Ullman explains that elves live way longer and grow slower than humans. Nobunaga, meanwhile, is casually grabbing her chest. Toyohisa is still processing that these kids are older than him while they explain how the Orte kingdom destroyed their home. A map shows the spread of the Orte Empire, which runs on a policy of human superiority. Nobunaga analyzes the empire's expansion, noting they're fighting on all fronts and taking heavy losses. He explains that the empire is sitting on a powder keg of hatred from all the people they've oppressed. Nobunaga asks what the commander wants to do. Toyohisa says they'll welcome the soldiers. The scene shifts to the sound of marching boots. An Orte patrol troop makes its way through the dense forest toward the village. The soldiers are gossiping about Aram's troop getting wiped out, but they find it hard to believe. They can't imagine Long Ears actually fighting back and wonder what these drifters are. The Orte soldiers are closing in on the village, feeling pretty cocky with 200 men. They figure it's overkill for a puny elven village. A scout comes back to report to the captain. Turns out, the village is a ghost town. Not a single person in sight. The soldiers march in, finding the place completely deserted. They tear through the houses, but every single one is empty. The captain stands there, wondering what the hell is going on. Then they find a real surprise. The Long Ears dumped waste into the wells and dug weird holes near the bathrooms. The captain is losing his mind. He thinks it's some kind of stupid elven superstition. But they aren't alone. Up in the canopy, Toyohisa and the crew are watching their every move. In the shadows, Nobunaga declares that tonight is the night they wipe them all out. He lays out the assets, 20 sets of armor and swords from the guys they killed earlier. Meanwhile, Yoichi is busy showing the elves how to craft bows and arrows. Nobunaga watches the training, noting how long-range weapons like bows can really steady a soldier's nerves. He tells a story about Akechi Mitsuhide getting taken down by peasants with spears to prove his point. Toyohisa watches him, realizing Nobunaga actually enjoys plotting this kind of nasty stuff. Nobunaga explains his core philosophy: wars are won before the actual fighting even starts. He shows off the stash of gear they've managed to scavenge. Almond and the elves are horrified. They finally realize where those missing corpses went. Nobunaga gathered them all up. He admits he buried the heads properly, but he had other uses for the rest of the bodies. The smell is absolutely gut-wrenching. Nobunaga reveals his saltpeter mound, a lovely cocktail of soil, grass, waste, and dead soldiers. Almond looks like she's about to lose her lunch. Nobunaga warns that they have to keep the villagers away from the pile so they don't catch any diseases. He argues that he's just speeding up nature's work, and he won't let good resources go to waste. He shuts her up by pointing out that humans are basically bags of waste anyway. At least he gave the heads a decent burial, so they have something to pray to. Nobunaga asks if she really thinks a soul sticks around in a body filled with waste. Almond realizes the biggest gap between her and these drifters isn't technology, it's their cold-blooded views on life and death. Nobunaga drops a new nickname on her and asks if she can fetch some sulfur, which he helpfully describes as powdered fart. Almond tries to talk business, but Nobunaga tells her he'll pay up after they've conquered half a dozen countries. She stands there totally lost, wondering what kind of crazy plan involves bathrooms, corpses, and sulfur. Over the training ground, the elves are getting pretty good. One of them nearly nails a bullseye. Yoichi is genuinely impressed. These guys are picking this up way too fast. Shera explains that his people were actually archery masters before the war took everything away. He draws his bow, more determined than ever. The elves are feeling the hype. Shera lets another one fly, and it's a perfect shot. He gets a bit too intense and starts splitting his own arrows. The other elves have to tell him to calm down before he ruins the whole stock. Back in the present, the moon is high. It's time to move. Toyohisa rallies the elves. They're moving in to strike the village and kill every last soldier. But he's not stopping there. He tells them they're going straight for the governor's castle to take his head. Even Nobunaga is taken aback by that one. Toyohisa asks why there are no young women in the village. He tells the elves to go get their families back and be men again. It's time to send the enemy to hell. He says if there's any justice in the world, then what they're about to do is the only right thing. Toyohisa continues his speech, urging the elves to fight not just for survival, but for their pride. He tells them to recover their women, children, and country so they can face their ancestors without shame. Nobunaga watches Toyohisa, recognizing him as a true military commander. He notes that Toyohisa has the innate ability to lead men directly into the jaws of war. Under the gaze of the full moon, Nobunaga reflects on the nature of this leadership, calling it a form of pure insanity. Back at the village, the night is quiet, but the air is thick with tension as the moon illuminates the empty houses. The occupying soldiers are arrogant and bored, openly discussing their plans to raid and destroy the surrounding villages the following day. One soldier's boastful laughter is silenced instantly when an arrow pierces his neck from the shadows, marking the beginning of the elven revolt.